Imagine risking your time, your energy, your reputation, even your peace, to save someone who had no one else. You defended them when everyone abandoned them. You believed your loyalty would create loyalty in return, but instead, they became the very person who destroyed your trust. If this has happened to you, you probably asked yourself one painful question. Why would someone betray the person who saved them? The answer is darker than most people realize. It isn't because they're always evil. It isn't because you weren't good enough. It is because human nature follows laws that most people never learn. Today, we'll uncover one of the oldest psychological truths ever observed, a principle echoed by Machiavelli centuries ago, yet still shaping friendships, families, workplaces, and relationships today. Before we begin, write this affirmation in the comments. I value wisdom over approval. One simple sentence, because the people who seek wisdom stop repeating the same painful mistakes. Now, let's begin. Most people believe that when you save someone's life, stand beside them during their darkest hour, or help them overcome a crisis they could not face alone, you earn a place in their heart forever. It seems like the natural order of things. We are taught that kindness creates loyalty and that generosity is always remembered. But human nature rarely follows the rules we wish it did. The moment you rescue someone, something invisible is created between you and them, a psychological debt. At first, that debt feels harmless. They thank you sincerely. They speak highly of you. They tell others that they could never have made it without your support. For a while, it appears that your bond has become unbreakable. Yet time has a way of changing emotions. As they recover, grow stronger, and rebuild their confidence, the meaning of your help begins to shift. Every time they look at you, they are reminded of the weakest version of themselves, the frightened, uncertain, dependent person they desperately want to leave behind. Your presence becomes more than a reminder of kindness. It becomes a reminder of vulnerability. Few people enjoy revisiting moments when they lacked control over their own lives. Rather than confronting those uncomfortable feelings, the mind searches for relief. It quietly begins rewriting the past. Maybe I wasn't as helpless as I thought. Perhaps I would have found a way eventually. Their role wasn't as significant as I remember. These thoughts rarely appear all at once. They grow slowly, almost unnoticed, until they reshape the entire memory. Appreciation fades, discomfort takes its place, and that discomfort can eventually harden into resentment. Ironically, the more completely you lifted someone out of despair, the more difficult it may become for them to see you without reliving the pain of needing help. Instead of embracing the person who saved them, they distance themselves from the living reminder of a chapter they wish had never existed. In trying to erase the memory of their own weakness, they often begin by erasing the importance of the one who stood beside them. Gratitude is one of the most sincere emotions a person can experience. Yet it is also one of the easiest to lose. In the moments immediately after receiving help, people often feel deeply thankful. They recognize your sacrifice, your patience, and the difference you made in their lives. They may promise never to forget what you did for them. And in that moment, they genuinely believe it. But gratitude lives in the present, while pride grows stronger with time. As people recover from hardship, their confidence slowly returns. The fear that once overwhelmed them begins to fade, and with it, the emotional intensity of the memory. What once felt impossible now seems manageable. The crisis becomes a story from the past instead of a reality they still carry. This change creates a subtle psychological conflict. If they continue giving you full credit for helping them survive, They must also continue admitting that they once depended on someone else. For many people, that admission becomes increasingly uncomfortable. Independence is one of the deepest human desires. We want to believe we shaped our own destiny, overcame our own obstacles, and earned our victories through our own strength. To protect that belief, the mind quietly edits the past. It doesn't always erase your contribution completely. Instead, it gradually reduces it. They gave me advice, but I made the final decisions. They opened the door, but I walked through it. I probably would have reached this point eventually. These thoughts feel harmless, yet each one shifts the balance of the story. Little by little, your sacrifice becomes a footnote instead of the turning point. This is why gratitude often has an invisible expiration date. It survives only as long as it does not threaten a person's pride or self-image. Once remembering your help feels like confessing weakness, the mind chooses comfort over accuracy. It is not always an act of deception. It is often an act of self-preservation. The tragedy is that while you continue remembering the effort you gave, they are slowly remembering a different version of the past, one in which they needed you far less than they actually did. Kindness is one of the most admired qualities a person can possess, but admiration and respect are not always the same thing. Many people spend their lives believing that the more they give, the more they will be valued. They become the friend who is always available, the partner who always forgives, the colleague who never refuses a favor, and the family member everyone can rely on. They sacrifice their own time, energy, and peace, believing that endless generosity will secure lasting appreciation. At first, it often does. People thank you, praise your selflessness, and celebrate your willingness to help. But human psychology has a habit of normalizing whatever becomes constant. What was once extraordinary slowly becomes expected. Your sacrifices are no longer viewed as gifts, but as part of your role. The more consistently you place yourself second, the more people begin to assume that is where you belong. Without realizing it, you teach others how to treat you. Every time you abandon your own boundaries to solve someone else's problem, you quietly send a message that your needs can wait. Over time, that message becomes their expectation. Respect begins to fade because respect is closely tied to perceived value, and value often depends on scarcity. People tend to appreciate what they might lose far more than what is always available. Someone who knows when to say no often commands more respect than someone who never does. This is not because refusing help is noble, but because boundaries communicate self-worth. They show that your time and energy have value. Unlimited kindness without limits can unintentionally signal desperation for approval rather than confidence. And people instinctively respond differently to those who seek approval than to those who quietly respect themselves. This is one of the paradoxes of human nature. The person who constantly rescues everyone may eventually become invisible, noticed only when they stop giving. Their absence creates more impact than their presence ever did. True generosity is not measured by how much of yourself you sacrifice. It is measured by your ability to help without abandoning your own dignity. When kindness is balanced with self-respect, it inspires admiration. When it exists without boundaries, it is often mistaken for weakness, even when it comes from the strongest heart. Not every betrayal begins with open hostility. In many cases, it develops slowly beneath the surface, hidden inside emotions that neither person fully notices at first. One of the most powerful of these emotions is resentment. It rarely appears immediately. In the beginning, the relationship is often defined by gratitude. The person you helped may genuinely appreciate what you did for them. They may look up to you, trust your judgment, and even feel inspired by your strength during their weakest moments. But as time passes, something subtle begins to change. Human beings naturally compare themselves to others, especially to those who played a significant role in their turning points. Without realizing it, they start measuring their progress against your presence. Every achievement they make while remembering your help can create a quiet tension inside them. Instead of purely celebrating their growth, they also become aware of the gap that once existed between who they were and who they are now. And in that comparison, discomfort begins to grow. It is not always directed at you at first. It may appear as small irritations, brief moments of emotional distance, or unexplained shifts in attitude. But over time, that discomfort needs a target. The mind seeks an explanation for why being around you feels emotionally complicated. Rather than confronting their own insecurities, it becomes easier to reinterpret your role. Your kindness is no longer seen purely as generosity. It begins to be reframed through suspicion, criticism, or selective memory. They may start questioning your motives, minimizing your impact, or focusing on your imperfections. This mental shift creates emotional relief because it reduces the sense of indebtedness and comparison. Once that narrative takes hold, resentment can quietly replace gratitude. And when resentment grows strong enough, it often justifies distance or even betrayal. The painful part is that from your perspective, nothing obvious changed. You remain the same person who helped them. But inside their mind, the story has already been rewritten in a way that makes separation feel necessary, even deserved. Every person builds an internal story about their life, and that story is central to their identity. It defines who they are, what they survived, and how they overcame their struggles. It gives meaning to pain and structure to chaos. When someone enters that story as a rescuer during a critical moment, the narrative changes in a way that is not always comfortable for the one being helped. Suddenly, the turning point of their life is no longer something they accomplished alone. It becomes connected to another person. At first, this can feel comforting. They may even express deep gratitude and recognize that they would not have made it without you. But as time passes and their confidence returns, another psychological process begins to emerge. Independence becomes emotionally important again. People naturally want to feel that their survival, success, and growth belong entirely to them. The idea that someone else was responsible for a pivotal transformation can slowly become difficult to accept. Not because it is false, but because it challenges their sense of self. To resolve this internal conflict, the mind begins to adjust the narrative. Your role becomes minimized, reinterpreted, or reframed. Instead of being the reason they were saved, you become a temporary influence, a support system, or simply someone who was there at the right time. In some cases, this shift goes further. They begin to distance themselves from you, not necessarily out of hatred, but out of a desire to reclaim authorship over their own story. If they can prove they no longer need you, then they can fully believe they were never truly dependent. This is why betrayal can feel so irrational from the outside. You see continuity. They experience transformation. You remember saving them. They remember becoming someone who no longer needs saving. In extreme cases, rejecting or even opposing the person who once helped them becomes symbolic proof of independence. It is not always personal in the way it appears. It is often psychological, a final attempt to rewrite the story so that they remain the sole author of their identity. At first glance, being indispensable seems like a powerful position to hold. It feels safe to be the person everyone relies on, the one no situation can function without. Many people unconsciously strive for this role in relationships, friendships, workplaces, and families. believing that if they become essential enough, they will be valued, protected, and never replaced. But human psychology reacts differently to dependence than we often expect. When someone begins to feel that they cannot function without you, that dependence does not always create gratitude. Over time, it can create pressure. And pressure, when it becomes too heavy, often triggers resistance instead of appreciation. People naturally seek autonomy. They want to feel capable of handling their own lives, making their own decisions, and solving their own problems without external control. When your presence becomes something they perceive as necessary for their functioning, it can begin to feel like limitation rather than support. Even if you never intend to control them, dependency itself can feel like a form of invisible constraint. As a result, the very thing that makes you valuable can also become the thing they want to escape. This is where the paradox begins. The more essential you become, the more threatening your absence feels, and the more urgently people may seek to reduce their reliance on you. Sometimes that reduction is gradual, expressed through small acts of independence. Other times, it is abrupt, even destructive, as they attempt to prove to themselves that they can stand without you. In extreme cases, this can lead to rejection of the very person who once supported them the most, not because your help was harmful, but because the emotional weight of needing you became too uncomfortable to carry. This is why relationships built entirely on dependence often struggle to survive long-term. True stability does not come from being irreplaceable, but from being respected while still allowing others the space to exist independently. The wisest approach is not to make yourself the center of someone else's survival, but to ensure that your presence strengthens their ability to function without you. Otherwise, the role of being indispensable can quietly transform from a position of value into a position that others eventually feel compelled to escape. The mistake most people make is not in helping others, but in misunderstanding what help is meant to create. They believe assistance should lead to lasting gratitude, loyalty, and emotional attachment. But wisdom sees something different. True help is not about securing someone's dependence on you. It is about increasing their ability to stand without you. When support becomes a form of permanent rescue, it quietly distorts the balance between two people. One becomes the giver of solutions, the other becomes the receiver of them. And over time, that imbalance reshapes the relationship itself. The wise understand that every act of support should carry an invisible limit. They guide instead of carrying. They teach instead of replacing effort. And they step back once stability begins to return. This does not come from coldness, but from an understanding of human nature. People grow stronger when they are challenged to use their own strength, not when every obstacle is removed for them. When someone is constantly saved, they may feel protected in the moment, but weakened in the long term. And weakened people often experience discomfort when reminded of their dependence. That discomfort can later be misdirected toward the very person who helped them. The wise avoid becoming the center of someone else's recovery story. Instead, they position themselves as a bridge, not a destination. They allow others to cross, but do not ask to be carried across with them. This creates relationships that are built on mutual respect rather than emotional debt. It also protects both sides from the silent resentment that often grows in unequal bonds. The strongest form of generosity is not endless giving, but giving that empowers. And the highest form of intelligence in human relationships is knowing when your involvement should end. Because in the long run, people do not stay loyal to those who saved them the most. They stay close to those who allowed them to become capable of saving themselves. Most people only understand the true nature of betrayal after they have already experienced it. They look back and try to find a single mistake, a single moment where everything went wrong. But the reality is usually more complex. It is rarely about one action. It is about expectations built over time, emotional imbalances that were never addressed, and human psychology that operates far deeper than intention. You may have helped someone with sincerity, sacrificed for them without hesitation, and believed that your actions would permanently define your relationship. But human memory does not preserve emotions in a fixed state. It changes as people change. The person you once saved is not the same person who remembers being saved. Their identity evolves, their pride strengthens, and their need to see themselves as independent grows with time. In that transformation, the meaning of your role can also shift. What was once seen as salvation may later be seen as something they needed to outgrow. This is where many people feel confused and hurt, because they assumed that goodness creates permanence. But human relationships are not preserved by past actions alone. They are shaped continuously by perception, emotion, and self-image. Understanding this does not mean becoming cold or distant. It means becoming aware. It means recognizing that helping others is not a transaction that guarantees loyalty, but a reflection of character that stands on its own. When you accept that gratitude can fade, that people reinterpret their own past, and that independence often matters more to someone than appreciation, you stop relying on emotional outcomes you cannot control. The lesson is not to stop helping. The lesson is to help without attaching your peace to how others remember it. Because the most painful betrayals are not always about malice. They are often about people rewriting their story in a way that allows them to feel whole again. And once you understand that, you no longer measure your actions by how they are repaid, but by whether they were true to who you are. If you've made it this far, you already understand something most people only learn through experience. Human behavior is not always loyal to gratitude, and memory is not always loyal to truth. People change, stories get rewritten, and even the deepest moments of connection can be reframed over time. That doesn't make kindness wrong. It just makes it incomplete as a strategy for predicting how others will behave. What matters now is what you do with that awareness. You can either become bitter about it, or you can become precise. You can stop expecting emotional guarantees from human nature and start building your choices on clarity instead of assumption. Help when you choose to help. Give when it aligns with your values. But never outsource your peace to how someone else remembers you. Because the strongest position you can hold in life is not being needed, or being praised, or being remembered perfectly. It is being grounded enough that other people's shifts in loyalty, memory, or perception do not shake your sense of who you are. If this message made sense to you, leave this affirmation in the comments. I help without attachment, and I protect my peace without guilt. Not because it sounds powerful, but because it reminds you of something essential. You are responsible for your actions, not for how others rewrite them later.